Hiya folks, Mrs. Dunn here with a little video about mixing tempera paints for our lawn garden project. Today I'll be showing you a little bit on how to mix various browns and greens. Remember that for this project you need to have at least 3 different greens used in the grass portion of your painting. There are some rules to how we're using paint colors for this project. First, you can't use black paint. Second, you can only mix 2 colors at a time. You should only need at most 2 of the following colors: magenta, red, orange, yellow, green, turquoise, blue, and violet. And as a heads up, later on in this demo I do incorrectly label violet as purple. Just be mindful of that little switch up. And third, white does not count as a color, so please feel free to add it as the third paint added to any of the mixtures that you've created. And as a side note, please don't pour more than a quarter-sized amount of paint per color at a time. And also, it's a lot easier to get more paint than it is to put unused paint back. So it's better to just start small. And also, please try not to let your paint dry on your brush. Be sure to rinse it and keep it clean. Thanks. So, you technically only need 1 brown for the dirt in this project, but I would really like to encourage you not only to carefully consider the shade of brown, but also to try using multiple browns to really give the earth some variety. To start off with, I will be using complementary color combinations. First up is yellow and purple. Of course, depending on how much of each color you choose to mix, the overall color combination may vary. Overall, it should be a fairly warm, possibly milky brown. Now for the red and green. This combination surprised me the first time I did it because I expected a lighter brown. However, this combination gets a pretty dark and fairly gray brown. This would be a really great way to mix the replacement color for black. For orange and blue, this combination gets pretty neutral and gets to be an almost cool brown. Now, because orange and purple both have a little red in them, this brown turns out to be very warm. With a little more orange added, the earthy color reminds me of soil that you might find someplace like Georgia. To get the iron-rich look of dirt, add a little more orange than I did in this mixture. Orange and turquoise turns out to be very close to yellow and purple, but a smidge cooler. Orange and green is a great combo if you want to get a nice and earthy brown that you might find on a forest floor. If you give it a little bit more green, it looks almost like a dirt color that you might find to have a lot of microorganisms such as algae living in it. Green and purple is simply an experiment. I know in my head it won't work, but I still want to see the visual difference between the orange and green combo. This turned out to be very blue, which makes sense, but it could be a great replacement color for black if needed. So, for your greens, you're going to need 3 or more different shades for your grass. If you use your green for a plant or an object, you could end up with even more shades if you desire it. For starters, we have our basic, generic, pre-mixed green. You can simply add another color to the green to slightly alter it, or you can create a green from other colors entirely. This is your basic run-of-the-mill green. It is fairly bright and not super earthy, making it easy to mix with any other colors you might want to use. I initially expected the blue and yellow combination to create a much more vibrant green. However, it seems less saturated than the straight-up green paint. I suppose, in the end, this makes the green seem a little bit more realistic. Green and orange reminds me of a nice summer green. Adding purple to green gives it a much deeper and richer color. Like my other experiments, I knew yellow and purple would likely not make a successful green, but I had to try it just to prove it to my intrusive thoughts. And as you can see, it turns out far too warm. Yellow and turquoise ends up being a color that very much reminds me of spring. It has that seedling green color. Now, as you move on to your plant or plants that are a bit more complex than, well, grass and dirt, you might want to have a bit more flair to your brush strokes. One way to have a little bit of fun is mixing and blending colors and loading more than one color onto your brush at a time. That way, you can get more blending and variety with one single paint stroke. First up, I'm experimenting with adding both magenta and white to my brush, likely because they are the first two colors that pop into my head when thinking about flower petals. I'm going to blame cherry blossoms for this. At this point, I realize white on white shows up poorly, so I will be loading up magenta and turquoise. I suppose there is still a little bit of white, which kind of adds even more variety to this stroke. And that about wraps things up for this video today, folks. I kept things pretty simple, as I know if you're like me, your attention span is not unlike that of a goldfish or a gnat. However, I do hope it was long enough for you to walk away with at least one thought of note. This has been Mrs. Dunn, and I really hope you have some fun creating today. Goodbye.